Thank you so much. Bitcoin and liberation theology, huh? You may be wondering, what could the two have to do with one another? Bitcoin has gotten a lot of bad press, I'd say. People say that it's for criminals, it's a scam, it's for far-right anti-government extremists. But in this presentation today, I want to tell you about grassroots movements like Bitcoinocracy that are popping up all over the world among the poor and the oppressed who are using Bitcoin as a tool for their liberation. Why? Because Bitcoin allows users to subvert big banks and monetary colonialism. It provides an alternative to inflationary currencies and the hegemony of the US petrodollar. It enables dissidents to bypass the restrictions of oppressive authoritarian regimes. Refugees can travel with it across borders. Women can use it to hold on to their earnings and build savings in patriarchal societies. Bitcoin mining incentivizes the build out and operation of renewable energy, stabilizes the electrical grid, and generates profits that strengthen local economies. In the words of Farida Nabarema, a Togolese activist and co-founder of the African Bitcoin Conference, Bitcoin is, quote, the currency of decolonization. Yet scholars of religion and theologians in particular have by and large ignored or dismissed this Bitcoin revolution that is unfolding before our eyes. And I contend that, especially given the decentralized grassroots nature of this Bitcoin revolution, it is time for liberation theologians to pay attention and start exploring the radical ways in which this digital currency might help to unite marginalized communities across diverse contexts and empower the poor and the oppressed. But first, let me explain in broad strokes what Bitcoin is. Bitcoin is an open source, peer-to-peer electronic cash system. It is completely decentralized. It has no CEO or board or president. It is a public ledger where transactions are verified to prevent double spending by nodes, which are essentially computers that solve complex mathematical equations to show proof of work and are located all around the world. This process is incentivized by the nodes earning a reward by mining new Bitcoin in the process, as they add confirmed transactions in blocks to the blockchain, which is the record of completed transactions. This record is all public and openly available, although the specific information about senders and receivers of transactions are cryptographically encrypted. The protocol governing the Bitcoin blockchain caps the total number of Bitcoins that can ever exist at 21 million. So there is scarcity built into the system, which gives it its deflationary potential, meaning that the value of each Bitcoin is likely to increase rather than decrease over time. Since the Bitcoin network is a decentralized system, changes to its protocols require consensus among users rather than a top-down decision from government leaders or corporate executives. I mention these aspects of blockchain to distinguish it from other cryptocurrencies and uses of blockchain technology. There are many so-called altcoins and central bank digital currencies that have other protocols, and many people have been taken advantage of by scams in the emerging crypto markets, most notably Sam Bankman-Fried's fraud with FTX cryptocurrency exchange. So these Bitcoin advocates stress that education and financial literacy are essential. But to get back to the theme of this presentation, how is Bitcoin good for the poor? Many people think of Bitcoin as an investment strategy. It's a risky game to try to get rich quick. And indeed, the price of Bitcoin has been rather volatile. In US dollars, it peaked at close to $69,000 in November of 2021, then crashed to $20,000 the following year. But now it's back up to its all-time high and has been hovering around $70,000 lately. There are lots of analysts who track cycles and make predictions about when to buy and sell, but overall, since the Genesis block began the Bitcoin blockchain in 2009, the price of Bitcoin has rapidly increased, and its occasional downturns pale in comparison to the devaluations of fiat currency in nations such as Venezuela, Zimbabwe, and Sudan. So, for example, see here the price of Bitcoin as denominated in the Egyptian pound, another currency with high inflation. You'll notice that the price hardly dips at all in 2002. Progressive activists around the world, therefore, are beginning to recognize that Bitcoin holds its value more reliably than their own local currencies, or even than the US dollar, which has been the default global reserve currency since the establishment of the Bretton Woods system in 1944. So is Bitcoin a risky investment? In the words of human rights activist Alex Gladstein, only for those who have financial privilege. For the majority of the world's population, on the other hand, Bitcoin offers hope, stability, and freedom. Liberation theology calls for a preferential option for the poor. Drawing upon a Marxist critique of capitalism, liberation theologians typically object to the alienation of the proletariat from the means of production and promote socialism in order to empower the poor and dignify their labor. They advocate for revolution instead of reform. They want to change the system rather than simply encouraging more charitable giving that perpetuates the status quo. Now, Bitcoin is not socialism, although some have argued that it could facilitate at least anarchist visions of socialism. But Bitcoin is revolutionary in terms of its potential to upend the global financial system. It is DeFi, or decentralized finance, as opposed to CeFi, centralized finance. There is a protocol limiting the rate at which new Bitcoin can be mined and a cap on the total number of Bitcoin coins that can ever exist. So unlike fiat currency, Bitcoin cannot be manipulated by wealthy elites and governments or central banks to their own advantage. Now, as an example of how fiat currency is manipulated in order to benefit ruling elites, consider a government that wants to start a war, like my own after 9/11. How do they finance that war? They don't want to cut other aspects of their budget, so typically they print money and debase the currency, which then leads to widespread inflation. The military-industrial complex walks away with their pockets lined, while it is the poor who suffer, not only from the violence of war, but also as their wages, which were low to begin with, now have even less purchasing power. Or consider the CeFa system in West and Central Africa, where monetary colonialism continues by virtue of French control of the franc of the financial community of Africa, or the CeFa franc. More than half a century after the official end of colonial rule in these 14 nations, France still controls the monetary policy of its former colonies, restricting trade, setting exchange rates for the CeFa franc, rationing credit, requiring high reserves to be kept in France, manipulating interest rates, and backing military dictatorships that protect French financial interests, all to the detriment of the local economies of these African nations. Bitcoin, however, many Africans are arguing, offers freedom from France's ongoing monetary colonialism. That's why Farida Nabarima calls it the currency of decolonization. Bitcoin can be sent across borders instantaneously. It is highly resistant to confiscation. Can it be used by criminals and terrorists? Yes, but as its advocates argue, so can cash. Bitcoin's advocates believe that its contributions to the well-being of the poor and the oppressed vastly outweigh its possible abuses by malicious actors. In Beyond Liberation Theology, a polemic, Argentinian theologian and politician Ivan Petrea criticizes liberation theology for far too often succumbing to, among other ailments, what he calls gigantism and naivete. By gigantism, Petrea means that liberation theologians can become paralyzed by the intractable conditions of economic oppression and injustice. And by naivete, he means that the solutions liberation theologians offer in response to the gigantic forces of oppression all too often remain vague and wistful, merely poetic rhetoric, rather than constructive proposals with substance. Well, today, if anything, I hope that my presentation errs on the opposite side of the spectrum, as I suggest that perhaps Bitcoin could be a solution to tackle the immense poverty and oppression that exists in the world. But I don't want you to just take my word for it. I want you to look at how Bitcoin Data is using Bitcoin to empower women in Africa. Or how Ideas Beyond Borders is using Bitcoin to promote education and independent thought in the Middle East. Look at the success of the circular economy of Bitcoin Beach in El Zonte, El Salvador, which inspired the nation to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender. Ask Isaiah Jackson, author of Bitcoin in Black America, how Bitcoin can help Blacks separate from the racist banking system. Or social worker Nicole Dubrow, why Bitcoin is a life raft for people in marginalized communities in the LGBTQ community. See how Motive is using Bitcoin to empower the poor and the oppressed and emancipate people from oppression in Peru. Learn about how Bitcoin miners are converting methane gas from landfills into electricity. Read Jason Meyer's progressive case for Bitcoin. Watch videos from last week's Oslo Freedom Summit that discuss the role Bitcoin can play in reclaiming democracy. Listen to the Progressive Bitcoiner podcast. The list of liberation-oriented projects that are using Bitcoin to overcome poverty and promote democracy, human rights, and sustainable development goes on and on. But what does this all have to do with theology? There are Christian Bitcoiners, some of whom believe Bitcoin is such a perfect system that it must have been divinely inspired. There are also a fair number of critics of Bitcoin, such as David Columbia, who consider it to be a cult. Bitcoin does provide much fodder for analogies to religion. The first block is called the Genesis block. Its founder, Satoshi Nakamoto, vanished early on. Some of its advocates jokingly refer to themselves as evangelists for Bitcoin. But in my opinion, these are all superficial topics for analysis. More important theological questions have to do with the nature of history and redemption, how faith communities engage with new forms of digital technology, and matters of political theology. To elaborate briefly, liberation theology promotes the ideal of the unity of history, such that the church is empowered and indeed compelled to engage with political, social, and economic realities. Redemption is not merely a matter of life after death, but also entails the liberation of our bodies and our wider communities in the here and now. And liberation theology demands that we engage with the insights of the social sciences, and I would add the computer sciences, to use knowledge and technology for the sake of the good. With regard to political theology, Bitcoin's decentralized structure could revolutionize the way we think about sovereignty, the use of force, and the state of exception. In light of the theme of this conference, we might think about how different contexts could be united through their use of technology while using it to enhance their own local communities. I want to leave you with a quote from the philosopher Bradley Rettler, the co-author of a new book on Bitcoin that came out today. He says, "A system that works only when the people you trust are in power is not a very good system." I encourage liberation theologians to investigate whether indeed, as the slogan goes in the Bitcoin community, Bitcoin might fix this and aid the poor and the oppressed in their struggle for liberation. Thank you.